Have you listened to or watched the last 2 episodes of this series? The author of Child Bride, Suzanne Finstad, I've called her the Bloodhound because this woman has sussed out and sniffed out practically every person that Priscilla breathed on in her time growing up, even before she got to Germany, but especially her time in Germany. The author took great pains to interview over 200 people for Child Bride. So just in this chapter alone, we talk about how she broke up with Tom Stewart after Elvis left. She kind of had on again, off again dates with her chum Al Corey. From Al Corey, she went to Daryl Johnson, who was on the football team. And after Daryl Johnson, she then took up with a quarterback on the high school football team named Ron Trapp. And so Priscilla's running around with all these boys from her high school. Again, like I've said in previous episodes, not that big of a deal, but it becomes problematic when you have told the public for decades that you were just basically alone in your room pining for Elvis from the time he left her in Germany to the time that she reunited with him permanently when she was 17 in Memphis. So, there's so many inconsistencies over the years with Priscilla's story, and we'll get into that. The million-dollar question is, if Curie had indeed tried to attack Priscilla in the past, why would Priscilla be thrilled to invite Curie back? It's just truly amazing to me, and frankly, none of it really, holds up upon close inspection. Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Jennifer C channel. I am Jennifer C. I'm so excited to have you back for my Child Bride series. Today we're going to tackle chapter 17. This one is called Baby Doll from Child Bride, the untold story of Priscilla Beaulieu Presley. But before we get into the chapter, I just wanted to tell you really quick, thank you so very much for being so patient with me. I do know it's been a while since I uploaded a Child Bride video on my channel, or any video on my channel for that matter, but I have good reason. I basically completed my second international move in just under 12 months. For those of you that don't know, I was in Germany for the last year with my entire family, and we just recently, at the end of July, relocated back from Germany to the States. So now I'm back here in my home in the US, but when we got here, first 2 weeks, we didn't have any furniture. We had to buy a car. We had to enroll my kids in school. School was starting up in about 2 weeks from when we first got here. I had to do all these doctor's appointments for myself, my kids, my mom. It's just been a whole lot, you guys, a whole lot going on. I'm not even in my normal setup. I'm here on the floor in front of a bare wall in my bedroom, just slowly but surely starting to get my household back up and running. So it's been quite a bit. I just had to take a break from the channel for a moment to just breathe and get everything in my life settled. I'm about 75% there. It's been a lot, but I am happy to be back here with you to get back into Child Bride. So anyway, just wanted to thank you guys so much for being so patient and so supportive of me during this crazy time. But let's get into this chapter. Okay, so in the earring fell off. Great. Hold on, you guys. My earring just fell out of my ear. Lovely. Okay, so in the last 2 chapters or so of Child Bride, we've been talking extensively about what life was like in Germany for Priscilla after Elvis left her in March 1960. And as we all know, as she's famously portrayed in both of her memoirs, Elvis and Me, published in the mid-'80s, and Softly As I Leave You, published last fall, 2025, that when she first laid eyes on Elvis at the age of 14, there was no one else for her. And she chronicles in both memoirs about how she basically waited patiently for him between the ages of 14 and 17, never had a serious relationship with any boy her own age while in Germany, never really seriously dated. She talks about this period as being rather unsettling for herself, but not only for her, but for her parents as well, because they were very worried about her. They were worried about her wanting to be with Elvis so badly. They didn't really think that the arrangement and relationship was appropriate because, she characterizes her parents as not even really being Elvis fans, being very cautious about the fact that she even got an invite from a man named Cary Grant to go and meet him. So that's the story that Priscilla has told us, and she is sticking to it, you guys. Between the ages of 14 and 17, no one for her but Elvis. She pined for him, she waited for him, and there was no one for her but him until at the age of 17, she went to go live with him in Memphis at Graceland to finish out the last part of her senior year of high school in Memphis. Have you listened to or watched the last 2 episodes of this series? If you haven't, I'll go ahead and link them somewhere in the description, or if I remember, somewhere on the screen here. But the author of Child Bride Suzanne Finstad, I've called her the Bloodhound because this woman has sussed out and sniffed out practically every person that Priscilla breathed on in her time growing up, even before she got to Germany, but especially her time in Germany. The author took great pains to interview over 200 people for Child Bride, and a lot of them knew Priscilla during her high school stint in Germany, were friends that she knew, closer friends, acquaintances, boys that she dated. It's all there in black and white. Alleged, of course, because these are interviews, but still, Suzanne very, very carefully sets out the entire blueprint, and we can look at it and see, does this match up to what Priscilla has been telling us for decades in her memoirs and in her recollections and in her interviews? And what do we come to find out? The author says that it doesn't wash. Priscilla's story doesn't wash. Because remember, Priscilla's narrative has always been that she was loyal to Elvis, she was faithful to Elvis, pined for him, 100% loyal. These people are saying absolutely that was not the case. Suzanne Finstad, the author, details for us many relationships that Priscilla had with boys her own age at Wiesbaden High School during her time in Germany. And many of these people, boys that she was actually in relationships with that the author interviewed, and also Priscilla's friends and acquaintances that knew of these boys that Priscilla was dating, many of them characterized these relationships as being serious, as being quote unquote hot and heavy, so to speak, and definitely not casual flings, meaning Priscilla was very interested in these boys, as were these boys interested in Priscilla. So this chapter, chapter 17, Baby Doll, picks up precisely where the last 2 chapters left off, talking about these relationships that Priscilla was involved with boys at her high school on the army base in Wiesbaden. And it's very, very methodically pulling back all these layers of the narrative that Priscilla has been pushing on us for decades. It's the fall of 1960, and Priscilla has been going steady with a bad boy from her high school, 1 year older, by the name of Tom Stewart. We talked about Tom in previous chapters. If you want to hear more about how she first met and got in with Tom Stewart, you want to go ahead and check out those episodes. But in the fall of 1960, they broke up. And by all accounts, according to different people that the author interviewed, some people characterized it that Priscilla broke up with him. Some people characterized that Tom broke up with her. However it happened, everyone basically told the author that they were both really upset about the breakup. But apparently Priscilla wasn't too upset about the breakup, because within a few weeks, she had rebounded completely with another boy from her high school. Now, she had an on-again, off-again friend that was a boy. His name was Al Corey, and she would kind of alternate between dating him in between boyfriends and then talking to him and having him be a confidant for her. So he was actually more of, I would say, a chum rather than a true romantic interest. So she went from Al Corey to someone else on the football team, a boy named Daryl Johnson. Again, the author, being the bloodhound that she is, found Daryl Johnson and interviewed him for the book. Daryl Johnson characterized their time together as a 3-month fling that consisted mostly of passionate necking, going to sock hops and all of that. Al Corey, her, chum friend that we talked about, said that during that time, Priscilla was a very, very busy girl. So the author characterizes this time for Priscilla in Germany after Elvis left in March 1960, when she's kind of flitting around, from boyfriend to boyfriend. And the author tells us, Priscilla painted this period with a different brush, describing herself as still pining for Elvis and declaring that, quote, my head wasn't into dating, end quote. And remember, that differs from what Al said. Al's like, yeah, she was really, really busy during that time, meaning with a lot of boys. Classmates begged to differ, however. She was always dating, scoffed on Apollon. There were so many, it was kind of a joke. Elvis became almost a figment of Priscilla's imagination, a comet that passed through her life in the form of a phone call every few months. So just in this chapter alone, we talk about how she broke up with Tom Stewart after Elvis left. She kind of had on again, off again dates with her chum Al Corey. From Al Corey, she went to Daryl Johnson, who was on the football team. And after Daryl Johnson, she then took up with a quarterback on the high school football team named Ron Trapp and was wearing his Letterman jacket apparently within days of going out with him. And her girlfriend that we mentioned earlier, Donna Paulin, seems to characterize Priscilla during this time as being somewhat of a chameleon, meaning that she would take on the persona of whomever she was dating. So if she was dating a bad boy type like Tom Stewart, she kind of behaved a little bit darker and more edgy. And then if she was dating someone on the football team, like say a Daryl Johnson or a Ron Trapp, she would kind of turn into this all-American, like collegiate girl, I guess, to kind of morph and meld into the personalities of these boys. And the author says, like a chameleon, Priscilla would adapt to the image of her latest beau. She was very feminine, very refined, always very beautiful. And this is Ron Trapp saying this to the author. Maybe that was part of the overall aura of her. So Priscilla's running around with all these boys from her high school. Again, like I've said in previous episodes, not that big of a deal, but it becomes problematic when you have told the public for decades that you were just basically alone in your room pining for Elvis from the time he left her in Germany to the time that she reunited with him permanently when she was 17 in Memphis. So, there's so many inconsistencies over the years with Priscilla's story, and we'll get into that. And at this point in the chapter, the author also reminds us about a character that we've heard about extensively in earlier chapters by the name of Cary Grant. Now, Cary Grant had been discharged from the Air Force and had relocated to California with his entire family, but shortly after Christmas in 1960 had made a short visit to Germany. Now, Cary Grant, as you know, if you've been watching this, he was the one that took Priscilla to meet Elvis in the beginning. Before Priscilla knew Elvis, she knew Cary Grant. And there's a lot going on in that tumultuous relationship between Cary and Priscilla. If you want to hear the whole dark, despairing tale, I would encourage you to go back to episodes 8 and 9. So Cary, while he is in California, is still mixing socially with Elvis. Remember, he was part of Elvis's friend group while Elvis was in Germany, and he spent quite a bit of time over at Elvis's house that he was renting in Bad Nauheim. So Cary is living in California and apparently still socializing with Elvis while Elvis himself is in California filming his movies and doing his projects. And Cary tells Elvis apparently that he's going to go back to Germany for a short visit. Elvis gets very excited and entreats Cary to, can you please go see Priscilla, look her up, take some pictures of her for me. I want to see what she looks like now, because it had been almost a year at that point since Elvis had seen Priscilla. So what was Priscilla's reaction to the fact that Cary wanted to meet up with her and take some pictures of her for Elvis? Well, according to the author and Cary, whom she interviewed for the book, she was thrilled to oblige this. Now, again, the author inserts the million-dollar question that so many of us, if you've been keeping up with this series, are left scratching our heads with. If Cary had indeed tried to attack, she accused him of in maybe 2, but 3 separate instances, although she can't entirely recall. In some interviews with the author, she alleged that it was twice that Cary tried to attack her. In other interviews, she had alleged that it was 3 times. I don't know how you could forget any attack and kind of waver between it was twice, maybe it was 3 times. Anyway, I digress. But the million-dollar question is, if Cary had indeed tried to attack Priscilla in the past, why would Priscilla be thrilled to invite Cary back and speak with him and allow him to take pictures of her for Elvis? And moreover, Priscilla had told us in interviews with the author and in her memoirs that she did tell her parents, allegedly, that Cary did try to attack her and that her father went to his superiors. Well, if that is indeed the case, nothing ever happened to Curie. He kept his position in the Air Force as if nothing had happened. He was not in trouble. He was not dishonorably discharged. And there are documented instances of Curie and his wife Carol, the Grants, socially mingling and spending time with the Beaulieus, for example, at a New Year's Eve party in Frankfurt. So there's all these inconsistencies, and biggest one, not to mention that Priscilla has also told us over the years that she was really afraid of Curie. She was worried, though, that especially in the beginning of her and Elvis's relationship, that he was kind of the key to get her to be with Elvis. He would drive her to and from Elvis's house. She didn't really know what to do. She didn't want to tell Elvis or her parents that he had allegedly tried to attack her, because then maybe her parents wouldn't let her go see Elvis anymore. And she said it basically got so bad that she did indeed tell Elvis this, who was, according to Priscilla, enraged and completely ostracized Curie from the friend group. We come to find out in past episodes that that wasn't the case at all, that Curie did indeed continue to socially mix with Elvis in Germany, allegedly after Priscilla had told him that Curie tried to attack her. In fact, Curie was the one who drove Elvis and Priscilla to the airport on the day of Elvis's departure back to the States. So there's so much to the Curie-Priscilla narrative. It's just truly amazing to me. And frankly, none of it really, holds up upon close inspection. Things that Priscilla says, when you look at timelines and take her narrative in comparison to other people's accounts in their interviews and their recollections of the same events, it's just all very murky and very characteristic of the way that Priscilla weaves her stories, hides behind what I believe, in my opinion, to be half-truths. It's all very, very telling of the secretive, riddle wrapped in a mystery that is Priscilla. And it's just amazing how we've seen in the last 16 episodes, and now here in episode 17, it's just so apparent to me. Priscilla has an absolute amazing ability to tell a story, to weave a yarn, so to speak, okay? And she can tell a story, but she can selectively and very carefully omit details that in these interviews with these people that the author conducted that knew Priscilla at the time. These are details that these people who knew her very well along the way, they themselves have an amazing ability to recall all these things that Priscilla glosses over, or kind of, tells a little bit of like a half-truth about, or things she happens to omit entirely. And these are people that were there too. And these are people whose recollections should not be discounted. Priscilla has had the bigger stage, the bigger microphone for decades. And she's been the one that has been in charge of this carefully crafted narrative. And now it's just so interesting. And mind you, this book was published in 1997, but there's so many people that don't know about this book that aren't necessarily aware of the extensive background research that Suzanne Finstad did for this book. But she's giving other people who knew Priscilla a voice, other people whose stories were completely forgotten or altogether discounted by Priscilla herself. So again, all of these interviews are alleged. No one can prove anything for sure. In many instances, it's always Priscilla's word against someone else, but it's always good to hear someone else's word, isn't it? Someone else's story. But I digress. So Priscilla is still deeply, deeply entrenched in this story that she has told us over the last almost 50 years now. Right? And this is where we find ourselves with her. And now we've got the author and all these people that the author has talked to in all of these episodes that, hey, let's go over this with a fine-tooth comb. Does it hold up when we hold it up to the light? What is going on with timelines? What's going on with stories? What's going on with all the different recollections here? And there have been some real biggies, some real inconsistencies in Priscilla's story. And there are three really, really big ones. And the first that Priscilla loves to tell us is that she was never an Elvis fan, really, of any great proportion before she met him. And there was absolutely no way that she pestered Curie Grant for an invitation to go meet him, because she, according to the author and Curie and people that were around that the author interviewed, that Priscilla caught wind of who Curie Grant was found out that he was a friend of Elvis's that went to go hang out with Elvis on a regular basis, and that when she found that out, she pestered him for an invite. She flatly and vehemently denies that. She also loves to tell us that her parents were staunchly against the relationship because of the age gap, because they weren't a fan and they didn't approve of his rock and roll status entirely. And as we've been finding out over these episodes, that was really not the case, that it really seemed like her parents were the ones that were starstruck about it, especially her father, who seemed to be enthralled with the idea that he was a multi-millionaire and he wanted his daughter in close proximity to Elvis, and that he actively encouraged the relationship between Priscilla and Elvis, despite being very, very strict in other areas of Priscilla's life. And those two are particularly important and hotly contested by Priscilla, because Priscilla cannot present herself to us as someone who chased after Elvis. She cannot present herself as being part of a family that pushed Elvis on her, that were really, really into the idea of her dating a super famous multi-million-dollar rock star, you know. Her parents, allegedly, according to this book and everyone that the author interviewed, wanted this relationship, pushed Elvis on her. She was kind of could take it or leave it, but it was really well known within Priscilla's friend group, among girlfriends that she had and boys that she dated that the author interviewed, that the father did not want any part of high school boys for Priscilla, that he wanted Priscilla with Elvis and with Elvis only. And he would actually communicate that to any boy that dared show up at the Beaulieu home, that they were not wanted there, that she was Elvis's girl. So of course, Priscilla can't let any of this out. She has to gloss over it, or she has to deny it, or she has to paint her family as being super strict, that didn't want her with Elvis, and she has to paint herself as this pining virgin who really didn't want him for, you know, his status, that she wasn't chasing him. Because what type of light does that put Priscilla in? Because it basically paints her as being, you know, somewhat of a shallow star chaser. It paints her as being someone who is looking at Elvis, seeing the gold mine that someone like Elvis is, and chasing after that. So she doesn't want any of that. So those are two of the big ones that she's perpetuated over the years. But the one that we've been dealing with over the last few chapters is that, you know, she's always said she was pining for him. There was never any boy in her life other than Elvis, and that also she was a virgin when she married him in 1967. And all these people are like, no. And I've told you guys in this series before that I have read and reread Elvis and Me over the years. And I got my hands on Softly as I Leave You and was reading it for the second time in the last few months on my Kindle. And it's interesting because, again, this is just proof about how she is pushing her narrative and characterizing her time with Elvis. Now, this is from her Priscilla's book, Softly as I Leave You. And she says, much has been made of the 10-year age gap between us, her and Elvis, but it wasn't unusual in the South. After all, 33-year-old Rhett Butler had first attracted Scarlett O'Hara when she was 16. Those are characters from Gone with the Wind, the novel by Margaret Mitchell. Of course, they were fictional characters, but they were symbolic of a cultural reality. Jerry Lee Lewis had famously married his wife when she was 13. Well, she happened to be his cousin, but okay, thanks for that detail, Priscilla. So had Edgar Allan Poe, another Southern icon. I, fortunately, wasn't a child bride. Who do you think she's clapping back at in that sentence? Though Elvis and I had started a relationship when I was 14, it didn't become a romantic relationship until I was 17. We waited to be intimate until he married me at 21. The fact remains, however, that there were 10 years between us. And trust me, we will get back to the chapter in just a second, but I think this is really important to reiterate because I've talked about this on my series before for Child Bride. There have been a lot of conflicting accounts. Just how serious were Elvis and Priscilla during their shared time together in Germany? Now, I'm of the opinion that they were a lot more serious than what Priscilla is trying to portray to us here and now, in late 2025 in her memoir, Softly as I Leave You. Because think about it, they had to be serious enough for her to leave that big of an impression on him. I mean, the guy did end up marrying her, okay? So there's that. And also, Priscilla weaves a very different tale in Elvis and Me, her mid-1980s memoir, a very different one than the one she's weaving in this 2025 Softly as I Leave You. And she tells us that she was romantically consumed with Elvis, and that before he left Germany, she was begging him to consummate their relationship, even though he refused, telling her that she was too young. Now, that doesn't speak to me of someone that's not romantically involved with someone. She's saying that she met him and had a friendship, but they weren't romantic until she was 17 years old. I just don't buy that, unfortunately. I do think the relationship was a lot more serious in the romantic sense than she's now letting on. Because as we'll see a little bit later in this chapter, Priscilla is writing these letters that are quite hot and heavy to Elvis, saying that she wants him and needs him more than anyone else in the world. And believe her, there's no one else in her world except him. That doesn't really speak to me as just a strictly friendship sentiment. I'm sure that there were strong romantic feelings between the two. We've talked about how when Elvis first saw Priscilla, all he saw was the long-lost memory of Deborah Paget. Deborah Paget was his co-star in the 1956 movie that he made called Love Me Tender. That's episode 5, I believe, but that is a very interesting one. But yeah, it's just, if the relationship wasn't romantic, then why would it make sense for her to pine for him, as she tells us extensively that she did in Elvis and Me? Or would it make sense that her parents are pushing her to get on with her life and to date other people and forget Elvis if she wasn't thinking of him in a strong romantic way? So getting back to how serious Priscilla and Elvis exactly were in Germany romantically, right? I mean, again, you don't have to be fully intimate to be romantic, but Priscilla's telling us in Softly as I Leave You that she was not romantic with him until she was 17 years old. But there's other members of Elvis's entourage, like Joe Esposito, who the author interviewed, and who he was saying that by all accounts they carried on like a dating couple, that they spent quite a bit of time alone together at Elvis's home that he was renting in Bad Nauheim. So there's just so much murkiness, and so much of it is perpetuated and maintained by Priscilla herself. I just finished reading Once Upon a Time, Elvis and Anita. It's the story of Anita Wood and Elvis Presley. I just actually finished it last night on my Kindle. It's written by her daughter, Janita Brewer Barrett. I hope I said her name right and did not massacre it. But it is such a sweet, sweet book, you guys. I really, really loved it. It was called Once Upon a Time, Elvis and Anita. And in the book, Janita recounts from her mother's memories and recollections, because her mother spoke to her about her time with Elvis. Her mother had said that it was that letter that Anita found in Elvis's office upstairs in Graceland from Priscilla after Elvis had left Priscilla in Germany. And Priscilla had been entreating him, saying, I want to come to Graceland. I want to be with you. Tell my father, he'll listen to you. He'll allow me to come. And that would say to me that there's something going on romantically there. That was the letter, the famous letter, that was the straw that broke the camel's back in Anita and Elvis's relationship. She had been with him for 5 years at that point, was very serious with him, thought she was going to marry him. And if indeed there wasn't a romantic connection, do you really think that Elvis would have allowed Anita and himself to break up over just a friendship letter? It's just, you see what I mean? There's so many things that directly just fly in the face of everything Priscilla has been telling us over the years. It just boggles the mind. So getting back to, and I have my notes here, getting back to this visit that Curie had with Priscilla when he returned to Germany shortly after Christmas in 1960. So he's going at the behest of Elvis. He's meeting with Priscilla and her mom, taking pictures of Priscilla on the grass behind her apartment on the Wiesbaden Army base. And, Priscilla's wearing like a really cute sweater and jeans. She just looked like a typical late 50s, early 60s teenager. In some pictures, she's holding flowers. And there's also other pictures that Curie took of Priscilla and her mother, Anne, which again, the author points out, and we all find very interesting if you've been following this saga. Why would Anne choose to pose for pictures with someone who allegedly attacked his daughter 3 different times and who had already been expelled from Elvis's friend group for attacking her, right? I mean, as with everything with Priscilla, it all makes just perfect sense, doesn't it? But anyway, despite all of these inconsistencies, the meeting goes off without a hitch. Curie takes photos of Priscilla for Elvis, pictures of her with her mother. They're beautiful photos. Priscilla was a very, very beautiful young girl. Obviously, that is why Elvis was so captivated when he first saw her. She was quite beautiful. If you're interested in seeing these photos that Curie took of Priscilla, I would encourage you just to go Google them. Just type in Curie Grant, Currie Grant, and you can just type in, Curie Grant photos he took of not Elvis, of Priscilla, and I'm sure they'll show up. The reason why I'm not going to show them in this video, you guys know about troubles and issues I have ran into on this channel posting photos that are possibly copyrighted. That's why I had to take down my entire Errol Flynn Slept Here series. I'm still very bitter Betty about that whole thing. I got a copyright strike on this channel from Warner Brothers for one photo I had used of Errol Flynn from 1943. But on a little side note, you guys, I am thinking of actually writing the publishing house and the authors of the book, asking their permission to have those videos on my channel. The more I get into it, the more I realize copyright's a sticky thing. And so I'm doing what I can. So I'm really thinking seriously about doing what I can of bringing that series back. If I have the author's permission to read that book on this channel, I will go ahead and put those videos up. I'll probably have to do a lot of re-editing because of so many photos that I have peppering the entire, I think it was like 18 episodes or so. It was crazy. I had beautiful, beautiful pictures of Errol Flynn throughout all of those videos, and unfortunately was worried about copyright, so had to take that whole series down. But anyway, the whole point I'm bringing this up is because I would show the pictures here, but considering all my negative experiences with my Joan Crawford series and with my Errol Flynn series of putting photos, classic photos in videos where I'm talking about the book and reading the book, I just don't want to do it. And in fact, I do think that Priscilla does hold the rights to these photos now, the ones that Curie took in early 1960, the ones he took of her that we've been talking about. I do believe she holds the rights to these photos. She sued Curie for defamation, and I talk about that in another video that I'll link down below. It's not as cut and dry as you would think. She technically won that case, but I don't really think she won it because there wasn't really anything proved. But point being, she then, I believe, bought the rights back to those photos from Curie. So if she does indeed hold the rights to those photos, there's no way in friggin' hell that I'm going to put them here in this video. We all know how litigious Priscilla Presley is, and, she's got a lot more time and money on her hands than most of us out here in the real world. So yeah, not going there, but they are out there on the internet if you're interested in checking them out. So Curie takes the photos, sends them back to Elvis, and at this point in the chapter, the author is telling us that Elvis is sliding back into his Hollywood life making pictures. He's shooting these pictures. Each shoot lasts up to about 6 weeks, and more often than not, Elvis is constantly dating and involved with all of his co-stars, women like Juliet Prowse, Anne Helm, Tuesday Weld, and at this time he's still steadily dating his Memphis girlfriend who's living at Graceland, Anita Wood. So Elvis is very busy, and the author tells us that his life was like an endless bachelor party recreated nightly at a house he was renting on Peruga Way in Bel Air, cast with eager, comely starlets from his pictures and anyone else who was fortunate enough to meet him and catch his fancy. Elvis in 1960 was the dashing prince in the kingdom of Hollywood who, with a wave of his magic wand, could transport some lucky girl into his fairy tale. And the author Suzanne tells us about this new character in Elvis's life at this time, a young girl by the name of Patty Perry. And when she met Elvis, she was a 15-year-old beauty school student who was on Santa Monica Boulevard driving one day in 1960, and this black Rolls Royce pulls up next to her. And apparently Elvis rolled the window down and was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And Patty said that her and her girlfriend looked at him and were like, "Do we know you from somewhere?" And it just kind of went from there. They all were laughing, and Elvis apparently really enjoyed her brash sense of humor, and she became this little, kind of like a platonic little sister that would hang out with him and his entourage. And she was apparently kind of like the way Shirley MacLaine was with the Rat Pack. Patty was kind of like the only female purely platonic friend in his entourage at the time, and and he had Patty become his hairdresser, and she would cut his hair, and she kind of hung out, and she was there during those times in the 60s in Bel Air when Elvis would be in California and shooting his movies and going back to his house and having parties and girls come over and stuff going on there. She was witness to all of it, and Patty tells the author that she was basically like a witness to this revolving door of females in Elvis's house, and she said it was like this open party, and that Elvis was dating basically everybody that he worked with. Now, at the same time in the chapter, the author tells us Priscilla, ironically, was conducting her love life in the same manner as Elvis. She had a life of her own way past anything, kind of in addition to her life with Elvis, her friend Al Corey put it, kind of like he did with her. Elvis had no clue. He saw her as this young, innocent girl. That's what Joe Esposito told the author, that's how Elvis was looking at her during this time. And the author continues, and when Curie presented his snapshots he took of Priscilla to Elvis that spring, Priscilla holding daisies and all that, in the field behind her apartment on the army base, smiling and fresh-faced, it perpetuated Elvis's romantic illusion of the little girl he had left behind who was saving herself for his touch only. And that was just how Priscilla wanted it, and later falsely presented it in books and interviews. In truth, she could have taught Elvis a trick or two about romantic manipulation and duplicity. Curie had given her proofs of the photos he took of her for Elvis, and Priscilla gave them to Ron Tapp, the football hero she was going steady with in Germany. I'm sorry if I pronounced his name Trapp earlier. I think I might have. It's Tapp, as in tap on the door. So he's the football player that she's going steady with in Germany. And the author's telling us that Priscilla had a good friend named Ronnie Garland, who we've talked about in other videos on this channel, who lived in the apartment below the Beaulieu's for 3 years in Germany. And she was saying that she saw Priscilla kind of characterizing this relationship with Elvis as almost being like a fantasy, like not so much being real, Elvis in this kind of fantasy, safe kind of world, but day to day, Priscilla still wasn't sure about her place in Elvis's life. He was still kind of distant. He was on another continent. He was just someone that would call her occasionally, but she wasn't really rock solid in, where their relationship was going. And because of that, she still had and maintained relationships with boys her own age, all these boys that we've been talking about in this episode. And the author says Ron, who dated Priscilla exclusively all through his senior year, regarded their relationship as serious on both their parts. And Ron Tapp goes on to tell the author that he really thought that the biggest obstacle to maintaining a relationship with Priscilla was her parents, and in particular, her father. Her father had absolutely no kindness of any kind toward Ron and would constantly make it known that, she was Elvis's girl and he just needed to back off. And he told the author that even if he would just kind of drop by the house, or one time he had dinner there, he just did not feel welcome at all. And that he really felt that Paul Beaulieu wanted strict control over Priscilla's life in that way. And Priscilla had another girlfriend by the name of Debbie Ross that we've talked about in other episodes. And Debbie says to the author, as I grew older, I thought, gee, that was really sort of strange that he, meaning Priscilla's stepfather, Paul, was strict with her among teenagers, and then she was seeing a man who was 10 years older than we were. Debbie, like Ronnie Garland, Al Corey, Suni, who is another person that we talked about in other chapters, and others, recalled Priscilla's father being strict and gruff about everything. Debbie concluded, as had the others, that the Beaulieus had a different policy where Elvis was concerned. There was 2 sets of rules, Debbie said, definitely. I recall discussing things like that with Priscilla and wondering, well, how does that work? It happened, one could only conclude, because Paul and Anne Beaulieu were seduced by the glamour and glory of Elvis. Priscilla's teenage boyfriends didn't stand a chance. So one could conclude that if Priscilla is dating these boys, she's probably doing it behind the back of her stepfather. I mean, he obviously wasn't approving of any of it, so she probably did have to sneak around. And there are girlfriends that the author interviews that said, yes, indeed, that is what she would do. So that doesn't really speak to me of a household where Priscilla is free to date and have fun and, just be with boys her own age. There's something going on there, and it seems like an agenda that Paul is pushing about wanting Priscilla to be with Elvis. So remember when Curie took photos of Priscilla, and it was around that time, remember I told you that Priscilla gifted some of these photos that Curie had taken of her to Ron, but she had also given Ron pictures of herself in baby doll pajamas, somewhat racy, kind of cutesy, provocative pajamas. And Ron goes on to tell the author that she gifted him these racy photos